Hi, hello, how are you? Craig Chapman here, and welcome to Brutally Roll Your Own Backend, a short video series on writing your own low-cost backend for a Delphi application. This is part 8, and we're going to start with doing a whole bunch of refactoring. We're not going to add the error checking just yet, but we're going to make the code a little bit more suited for the error checking. And we're also going to add an animation to our form for when the REST requests are being made, so that the user can see if the REST request takes some time, they can see that something is being done. So let's go ahead and get started on that. Okay, so we're back where we left off, and the astute among you might have noticed that I actually did introduce a memory leak in the last video. So if we go and take a look at this method in form create, I'm creating an array here, and I'm calling our CRUD class to fill that array, and then I'm copying the data from the array into this list, including a reference to the objects from the array, and then I never free the array. Now under the mobile compilers, what's going to happen is this is all going to work just fine. So the array will actually free itself at the end of the method, but these references to the objects keep the object in memory until we no longer need them, until this list is cleared, and they'll be disposed. But if we're running this on Windows, of course, because we don't have the automatic reference counting, what I'm actually doing is creating references to array objects which never get freed. So we're going to take care of that little problem in this part, but also I wanted to make a few changes to our interface now. So all of this code right here that's in the form, this code we're going to have to repeat for every method that we call. We're going to have to do our error checking and so on. And what I would like, given that this is a mobile app and we're going to be calling out over potentially a flaky wireless connection, I'd like to have some kind of retry if the connection fails and report the error message back as a connection failure if the connection doesn't succeed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make changes to our interface just to make life a little bit easier for us on the error checking side of things. So if I come and take a look at crud.client, this is where we started the interface previously, and this is where I'm going to make my changes. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to a procedure for the read method, and I'm actually not going to pass in an array at all, and I'm not going to have a return type. So it's simply a read method, and I'm going to do the same thing again. We'll put in a procedure read with filters, and we'll put t strings for the filters. So these will be the this will be the method where we can filter the read results. Let's put another method in, procedure create. Now the create method, we will have to put in some data, so I'm going to pass in an object, a tJSON object, procedure create read update, and we'll pass in an array of objects to be updated, tJSON array. Actually, let's go ahead and do the same thing and pass in an array of objects for the create method. Okay, and then we'll have procedure delete, and again we're passing in an array of objects which are going to be deleted. JSON array, and of course I need to fix that little data type there. Okay, so each of these methods is going to be something that we just call, but then we need to know whether or not it failed. Let's actually fix that t-strings first. So I believe that's in the classes library. Okay, now read is override, overload. You'd think I can get that right after the amount of times I've been programming it. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to put in some events onto this interface. So I'm going to put in function get on read start, and this is going to be a t, so we'll just call it t CRUD event, and that's going to be the data type that we'll use. And procedure set on read start CRUD event. Now we're going to have to give this data type some definition. So we're going to come in here and put in CRUD event is equal to, and we'll have a procedure into which we'll pass sender, which in this case is going to be the iCRUD client, and we'll pass an array which will be our, let's call it results array, tjson array. So we have this CRUD event for when the read starts. Actually, we don't need to pass results back in the read start. Sender iCRUD client. Okay, so we'll just keep it like that, and we'll have CRUD start event, and we're going to have of object, since the event handler will be on a form. The form is an object, and I can't pass in the CRUD client unless I do a forward declaration, so let's do that. Okay, so then we're going to have a CRUD success event, procedure sender iCRUD client, and results array tjson array of object. And finally, as you might have guessed, we'll have a CRUD fail event, procedure sender iCRUD client, and we'll have sometimes if you see me type tstring, that's because I have a library of code that I've written that I use very frequently, in which I've created my own alias of the string type called tstring. So if you see me make that mistake, that's why I do that. Of object. Okay, so we have CRUD start event, success event, fail event. This is the start, so start event, CRUD start event. And then we'll have function get on success, have read success, and we are going to, yes, it's the same thing. So CRUD success event set on read success CRUD success event. Okay, and you don't need to watch me type each of these out, so I'll fast forward until I've got them done. Okay, so what we have here, I've added the onCreate, start, success, and fail event handlers. So we've got a getter setter for each of those three events. The same for read, update, and delete. Then we have our CRUD methods. Let's go ahead and put these in order. Okay, and then we also have the Pascal only properties. So one of the nice things with Delphi Pascal is when you create an interface, you can put properties on that interface so long as the read and write methods exist on the class. So we've got an onCreate start, onCreate success, onCreate fail, and the same for the read method, update method, and delete method. So now, as long as we set these event handlers before we call any of these methods, we can have these events fire when the method succeeds or fails. And I also put the onStart. Now, success or fail obviously is the end of an operation. Start is the start, and the reason I have that is in the UI it would be nice if we could put some indication on the screen that a particular method is running, is functioning. So that's why I have that there. Okay, now that means that we've got a whole ton here of methods that we need to go populate. So let's go ahead and take a copy of all of that. and come on over to our standard implementation. Now the read method, as you know, we've just changed that, but I'm going to leave that alone for the moment. And I'm going to go ahead and put all of these methods in. And I'm going to delete some of my commenting here since we don't really need it in this implementation class. And there are the CRUD methods. So now what I need to do is for each of these, the create start, create fail, and so on, I need to have a private member, which is the event, what is it, the event reference, I guess. Okay, so for example, I'll have f on create start is a t CRUD start event, f on create success is a t CRUD success event, and f on create fail t CRUD fail event. And I need three of these for each of the methods: create, read, update, and delete. So again, a little more fast forwarding for you. Okay, now for each of these methods, we need to populate the getter and setter with the appropriate return value or setting value. So Control-Shift-C, and as an example, in the CRUD client create, I did not notice that create would conflict with our constructor. Okay, not to worry. I think what we can do with that, how best to deal with that? Well, I think I'm going to rename the constructor actually. Because we have this this CRUD unit here, this CRUD unit calls the create method, and that's the only place where create is called. And so, because I always call create CRUD rather than calling create, I don't really need to have create be the same name. It's a little bit out of the ordinary, but I'm going to go ahead and give our constructor a different name, just because I think that's the quickest, easiest way out of this this little trap that I found myself in. The alternative would, of course, be to rename the create method of CRUD, but that would mean to make it consistent. So let's go take a look at the interface, and I'll show you what I mean here. So I could rename this create method as, say, CRUD create or something like that. But then to make that consistent with the rest of the interface, I would really have to have CRUD read, CRUD update, CRUD delete. And if I go ahead and do that, then I would kind of want to also change my on create, on read, on update, and on delete starts. And I just don't want to go down the road of doing that much. So I'm going to go ahead and do the slightly unusual thing and rename my constructor. So this create here, I'm going to rename actually to construct. CRUD client construct, and then up here where I actually create it, I'll just use the construct method. So that just means that we get out of the problem of having the naming conflict. And I've got this inherited create right here, which is going to call the base class create method, so that can stay as is. Okay, so back to where we were. So I've got this get on create start, and I need to go in here and I need to put, well, this is a function, so result equals f on create start to get that private member. And then for the setter, f on create start is equal to e, because that's what I'm passing in. And I need to do this for each of these methods. So a little bit more fast forwarding magic for you guys. Okay, so each of these methods now has the getter, the setter, I noticed an error there, read start. I'm going to go ahead and continue and check each of these looks correct. Okay, so that does look correct. And then our read method here, because we introduced tstrings, we need to go and add the classes unit in here. So the class is looking a lot more filled out now, and you might be wondering, if you are wondering, why I put a getter and setter on each instead of putting some private members in the interface. Well, of course, the answer is you can't have private members in an interface. And the main reason for this is, remember that properties are a Pascal only feature. Interfaces are not. I could share this interface with code in C++ or C# or some other language which is binding to my code. And for that reason, these interface methods need to be portable, somewhat portable. And so, because we can't have properties, if I were using, say, C++ and I wanted to set the create start event, well then I need to be able to call set on create start, because I can't call this property. So that's why we have that. Didn't I tell you that interfaces would be a little more red tape? Okay, so we have those in place, and we've got our methods. Now I've still got two read methods here, and this read method accepts an array. It's not correct. We need to go fix that. So I'm going to go ahead and take the content of that method and copy it out and do away with the method itself. And then if I come back to the class, I can remove the header for that method. And what we'll do is we'll put it in this read method. So I'm going to go ahead and replace all of that content. Now, we don't have a result on this method, so I can get rid of that line. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if assigned f on read start, then begin. Call f on read start, and I'm going to pass in the sender, which is self. Okay, so this is call start event. And then what we need to do after we set up our REST client and everything is anywhere we're returning true, well, that would be a success event. So let's just assume that this method succeeds for the moment, and we'll say if assigned f on read success, then begin f on read success. Now this accepts two parameters, that's self for the CRUD array, getting my words mixed up here, self for the iCRUD client class or interface, and then we have the results array, which would be a. So we're passing that out. Now, one of the reasons that I broke the methods out in this way, let's go ahead and call read success method. So one of the reasons that I separated these out in this way was to fix the memory leak that we had on this array. So what I'm going to do is I need to declare the array as a tJSON array up here, and when I do this parsing, so we're calling parse JSON value, this parsing operation is actually creating or instancing this array. So the reference we have is to what's being created by the parser. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a try, and we're going to pass the array through to our read success method, and then I'll do a.dispose, which is going to dispose of that array. So what we know now is when we're using the interface in the read success event handler, we must do whatever we need to do with this array, knowing that it's going to be disposed of when the method ends. Okay, so in the interests of testing all of the typing that I just did and making sure that I haven't messed anything up, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to leave off the fail possibility from this method for the moment. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure that each of the other methods, so the create method is empty, read with filters, update, and delete. So they're all empty methods, they're not going to do anything. So let's go ahead and make our form call the read method. So a lot of this stuff has changed. On form create, what we're going to do, we're still going to create our CRUD class, and I'm still going to pass in the same parameters for the moment. But we're not testing for errors at this point, so we're going to take those out. Instead, what we're going to do is CRUD client dot on read start rather. This is the read method, so on read start, handle read start. CRUD client dot on read success is going to be handle read success, and CRUD client dot on read fail handle read fail. Okay, just having a quick think about this, because so we only have a single read client, a single CRUD client. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to move my CRUD client up into the private members of my form, and then I'm still going to create it in this onForm create event. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So let's take this CRUD client, and I'm going to put it up here in private declarations, and I'm going to stick a little F by it. That's a pretty typical convention, and then I can camel caps the variable name there. Now, this iCRUD client interface is in the CRUD unit, so that also needs to be moved into my interface section. Okay, and I guess we're going to have to move system.json also, because the events make use of that. So I'm going to go ahead and move that up here, and then for the CRUD client in the form create event, we'll set up these handlers. Now, what I'm also going to do is, while I'm here, I'm just going to go ahead and set up the handlers for each of the other methods. So again, I'm going to save you a little bit of watching me type and put in some, go ahead and do the fast forward. Okay, so you can see here I've set the on start, success, and fail handler for each of the 4 possible CRUD methods. I'm going to go ahead and collapse this up, take a copy of this because we're going to need it, and then I'm going to come up here into my public section. Actually, yes, I have another private section on this form, and see if we can use a bit of macros here. Okay, do the same again. Okay, and then what have we got? Handle update start. Oh, I put that in twice, which means I've got a typo. Delete, 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 and down here I've obviously put the updates methods on delete, so let's fix that. Okay, now we need to make each of these method handlers match the correct prototype. So let's go ahead and take a look at the start event. I can just copy this piece out here, and back on my main form, each of the start events should have this function header. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing again for the success. Okay, and I'm going to do the same once more for the fail event. Okay, so now we have a bunch of methods here for handling events coming back from our CRUD methods. So I'm going to Control-Shift-C to populate those out. And we've got a whole list of empty events which we're going to populate at some point as we progress through building this application. So the next thing we're going to do, we've got a form create event here which is creating a bunch of stuff. So let's go ahead and dispose of our CRUD interface in the forms destructor, or rather the onDestroy event. So onDestroy, we'll go ahead and just set fCRUD client equals nil, because it's an interface, it will be disposed. Okay. Now, I'd like to go ahead and call our read method, but we need to figure out what we're doing when the read succeeds. I've still got this code right here. So I'm going to take this code out and let's say on read success. We're going to go ahead and copy our regions code in. Now I know that we might not always be working with, let's see actually, CRUD client. I'm passing in the regions endpoint here. But what I think I'm going to do is, since I'm making this CRUD client somewhat permanent on form now, I'm going to have the endpoint as a property that we can adjust on the CRUD client. But for the moment, we're just going to go ahead and leave this regions, and we can go ahead and test what our code does when we get a successful regions read. So we've got the regions list box, and I need an IDX to handle the results. Unit 32, I believe I used. Okay, and then we need the array count. Well, the array's been renamed to results array, so we're still going to loop through each of those. We're referencing an object here, and I like referencing the object because, so if I were to put this syntax in place of this variable name here and this variable name here, it just starts to look really messy. So I'm going to have OTJSON object, which is a reference object. So we'll get that, and it's going to be the results array. But here's where we're going to do something different. So we're adding an object to this list. Let's see what our options are. So list regions.items.add. Now I can add a string by itself, but if I add a string by itself, then we don't have any way to reference the ID for that string. We've got this add pair method here. So we've got a name value pair that we can add in. We can add in an object, or we can add in strings. So I'm going to take a look at the pair first. I don't know, what I don't know here is if the name and value will both come out in the list. So I'm just going to go ahead and put in the name portion of it, and let's say we'll get the PKID of the record, int PKID, and make sure my brackets are correct. Okay, so why is that coming up in red? Handle update fail. I've done something wrong up here. Okay, too many brackets. Okay, so this is what's going to happen when we successfully read from that endpoint. We're going to copy that data into our list regions, and let's find out what add pair does, because I don't actually know, and it's as quick to try it as it is to check the documentation. So in our form create, I'm going to go ahead and call fcrud client read to get all records from the region table. And at this point in the recording, I had a small problem with the recording software. For some reason, I paused, I took a break, and when I came back, I thought I'd resumed the software recording, but I hadn't. So I actually came back and made some changes. So the add pair method didn't work. It brought out the name value pairs. So I swapped it out for this add object. Now, add object is a little bit of a hack. So what I've done here is I've got the name from our object, and I got the PKID from that same object, which I'm casting as an integer, or rather I'm using string to int to convert to an integer. And then I'm adding this information as an object. Now the name is as it always was, it's just a string, and that gets added into our list. But here I'm doing some really ugly typecasting, and this is a bit of a hack. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking the PKID, which is an integer, and I'm storing it in a native int data type. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, the native int data type is a data type which will always be the same size as a pointer for the target platform. So if I'm compiling for 32 bits, I'll have a 32-bit integer. If I'm compiling for 64 bits, I'll have a 64-bit integer. So I'm getting that value, that PKID, and I'm assigning it to this native sized integer. And because it's always the same size as a pointer, I can cast that as a pointer, which is what I'm doing here. And because a reference to an object in Delphi is always actually just a pointer under the hood, I'm casting that as an object. So that allows me to add this simple integer ID as an object. Now this is a bit of an ugly hack, but the alternative route would be to build a separate dictionary which stores the name and PKID values, and to synchronize that dictionary class with the list on the form. And I just didn't want to do that coding, so I put in this hack. So I'm going to cut us back in now to where I resumed the recording, and we can see this function. Okay, so our list of regions has appeared in the list box. The application hasn't crashed and burned, so we're looking good for that for the moment. Just to demonstrate how the other end of this function works, I'm going to go ahead and... No, I'm not. I'm going to leave that for next time. So we'll take a look at how to decompress this next time. Right now, what I would like to do is I'm going to put in an animation to let the user know that the system is connecting to the network. So it's calling our CRUD endpoint. It's connecting out via the internet. I believe the REST client from the FMX framework, I believe that class has a default of 30 seconds timeout. 30 seconds is a long time to wait if you don't know if anything's happening in your application. You could very easily think the application has failed, or be bashing buttons to make it do something. So we're going to put in some kind of an indicator that the app is functioning. And we can do that with these event handlers. So on restart, I'm going to call a method called animation start. And then on read success, I'm going to call a method called animation ends. Let's call it starts and ends. Okay. And of course, on the fail, we're going to have the animation end as well. So what these methods are going to do, we'll take a look at in a moment, but let's go put their headers in. So we're going to have procedure. In fact, let's put these at the top of our list up here. So procedure, animation start, procedure, animation ends, and that starts. Okay, so on our main form here, I'm going to go ahead and add a new panel. Now this panel is basically going to cover the entire screen when the application is working. It's going to be an overlay panel. So making sure that it is parented to my main, I'm going to name this and let's call it PNL overlay. And I want this to be aligned to the client region of the screen, and let's set its opacity. Actually, I'm going to keep it for the moment. Now I'm going to come up to the tab control here, and I'm just going to cut that, edit, cut, and then I'm going to click on form main and edit, paste, and Control V, there it is. So we've pasted the tab control here over the top of the form. So effectively that's like sending this PNL overlay to the back. Now there's a reason I've done that, and that is if we go into control, center back and bring to front, these options are grayed out, and as you just saw when I did the copy paste operation, the copy paste was grayed out at the worst possible moment when I wanted to paste something. This is a minor bug in the IDE, I believe. I'll check into that, but for the moment I'm just using cut and paste to reorder things on the form. Now I've got my panel overlay, and actually I need to bring that back to the front, so edit, copy, edit, paste, it's back on the front, because I need to do some work with this. So we're going to grab an image, T image. So there's my T image, and we need something to put in this. Now I just went out onto Google and found an image. So this image is just a radar gradient, but what you'll find is because it's a gradient, if we rotate this in an animation, it's going to look like that radar is animating. So I'm going to go ahead and align this image to the center of my screen, and I'm going to add an animation, and we're going to pick the float animation, so floating point animation. And then in the structure, I want to make sure that that animation is owned by the image. Let's go ahead and name the image just so that that's IMG overlay. Okay, and then in the floating point animation, we're going to pick out the image's rotation angle. There it is. We're going to start from wherever we start from, 0, and animate through 359 degrees. So that'll be our 360. And we're going to, let's make the duration 0.9 for a full animation. And I want this animation to loop until it's done. Okay, and enabled. I guess I'll disable that and enable when we need it. Okay, so now I can go ahead and do the cut, and shouldn't have even cut that. Let's paste that back. It's the tab control that I want to cut and edit, paste, so that's on top. Okay, so back here in our animation starts method, we will do PNL overlay dot bring to front. So that's going to bring the animation up to the front. PNL, actually IMG overlay. I didn't name the animation component, did I? Let's go and name that. So up here, the float animation. Let's name it to A&M overlay. And then of course in the code, we can enable that animation. And let's go ahead and do the same thing on animation ends. Now there is one more thing that I want to do with this, and that is just to make sure there's no sort of graphical artifact, I'm going to set the opacity of the panel to 0, so it's completely transparent. And when we start the animation, we'll do PNL overlay dot opacity. And I'm going to set the opacity something relatively low so we can still kind of see through it, but it's covering the screen behind, just to let you know that that's blocked out, grayed out in some way. And then up here, I'm going to do the same thing. So bring to front should be send to back. The opacity will set back to 0, so it's no longer visible, and we'll have false to terminate the animation. Okay, and in fact, let's go ahead and terminate the animation first, send to back, and set the opacity. So what's going to happen is when we start making a read call, we should get that radar animation. Let's see if we can, it might go a little too quickly to see on startup, but let's see what happens. Yeah, that went a little too quickly. So let's go ahead and change the regions endpoint to blur. So this endpoint is going to fail. The endpoint doesn't exist, but maybe that will give us time to see the animation here. 404 not found. Continue. Access violation. Okay, we've really upset it. So we're going to come back and deal with that error handling. We need a way to make our script respond slowly enough so that we can see the animation here. So let's go ahead and connect up to our endpoint, and we're in the www notifier, and let's go into public, and we're looking at the regions endpoint. Let's take a look at our code. Okay, so we need to introduce a delay in here. Let's see if I can find a delay in the documentation for PHP. There is a sleep function, and it's in seconds. That's excellent. So let's go ahead and before we respond, we'll put in a sleep for 5 seconds. Ooh. Sleep for 5 seconds. Okay, go ahead and run this, and hopefully we'll get 5 seconds of pretty animation. No, because it's in the form create, and the form hasn't been created yet. Okay. Right, so that stuff needs to be in the form create. I'm going to take my CRUD client read, and let's put it in the form show event. So here's form main, show, and run that. Again, a small issue with the recording software means that you didn't get to see me move the call to the read method into the on-click event of the region's add button. Okay, so for whatever reason, our animation is not functioning. It didn't bring it to the front, it didn't cause it to animate. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I think, is in our standard CRUD implementation, I'm going to make a change. So if I go and take a look at the read method here, we're building up this REST request, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that piece of code, or certainly let's take a look at the running of the request. I'm going to try putting that into its own thread, which we should be able to do using an iTask. So I need the parallel programming library. Okay, I need the parallel programming library in my users clause, so I'm going to go ahead and put in, let's correct that, that's slightly irritating. So I'm going to put in system.threading in here, and then in my read method for the execute call, I'm going to try putting this in its own task, which means I need a task reference. So we'll call that t_iTask. Okay, and what we'll do here is t becomes equal to t_task.create, and then we're going to put in an anonymous procedure begin, and we will do request.execute from in here, and then let's make sure I close this method out correctly. So it would be that, I think, and then we're going to wait for the task to, should I wait for, yeah, I believe we should wait for the task to complete. So we'll do t.start, and then I'm also going to do, what's the wait for instruction? I believe it's just wait for. Okay, we've actually got a wait for all instruction in the documentation, so that would be t_task.wait for all, and then it wants an array of tasks, and I'm just going to pass in t in that array. Doesn't seem to like something here in the syntax, but I'm going to go ahead and give that a try. Let's see if that builds. There are errors. What have I got wrong here? So it's an anonymous method. Oh, I don't need to close the anonymous method. Okay, and if I click on add, something is not working. Okay. My best guess would be that it is the wait for which is not working, because I think the main thread is blocking and waiting at this point. Okay, so the problem I have here is this onRead event. When we call this onRead event, we are going to be updating the UI, and that's going to be pushing the animation to the back or whatever we do on the success event. Now, anything that's UI really needs to be run in the UI thread, and so for that reason, I can't really put this method handler inside of the task. Otherwise, everything in this procedure could go inside the task, and we could run it that way. Now, there is a synchronize method on the t_task, and I'm just looking that up in our documentation now. Executes a method call within the main thread. Yeah, so okay, what we're going to do with this, I'm going to take the task that I'm creating and I'm going to put this up around the entire function, and we will tab this all in, and then the end of the task here, let's we don't need to wait for all, and I'm going to take the start out and we're going to put all of this, I'm going to tab in, and then this would be the end of our anonymous method, which I'll close out like this, and then we'll have, t.start. That's going to make the entire REST client creation and calling of the REST client, all of that is going to happen within a task. Now, when we want to send the onRead success, we need to do this within a call to tthread.synchronize. And I'm again looking up the documentation just to see if there's an example of that. So we'll have tthread.synchronize, and then we're going to produce another anonymous method here, and that's going to be begin. We will call the event handler there, and then we'll end that anonymous method. And that's the end of that synchronize call. So that will happen, this piece will happen in the main thread. Now there is another event call, which I have up here, which is starting the main event. But we can go ahead and pull that out and put it in before we start the task, before we build the task up. Now all of this code is tabbed over a little too much. That doesn't look right, but I guess it is. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to call our onStart event within the main thread, then we're going to create a task which actually does the call. When that task completes the call, it's going to come back to the main thread to call the onSuccess event, and then it's going to dispose of everything. And then at the bottom here, we call t.start to kick that whole process off. So let's go ahead and see how that works. There are errors. Let's see, what have I done here? It says synchronize is inaccessible here. Okay. It's a case of RTFM right there. And we have an animation, and it should last about 5 seconds. Yes, excellent. So finally, we have that that little problem of the blocking thread sorted. Great. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come back to my main form, and I'm going to take this read method. And it didn't work in the onCreate before, and I thought that was because the form hadn't fully been created. But it seems it was the threading issue, so I'm going to go ahead and put this back into the form create. Oh. And I'm going to also make sure that I don't still have a form show event. Event show. Oh, I just added one in. There we go. Okay, so if I run this now, will it happen on the initial startup? And yes, there it is. And there's our data. Now, the opacity of the form doesn't seem to be enough to indicate on my screen, I don't know if you can see on yours, to indicate that something is going on. So we can adjust that in the animation starts. Let's set the opacity. I'm going to put it at the opposite end of the transparency there and just see how that looks. Remembering that we can actually change some of the properties of this panel with styling later. So yes, that's clearly blocking the screen out. And there we have our data coming back. So that's it for part 8. My name is Craig Chapman. Thanks for watching, and until next time.